For mobility professionals, this is Inside Intertraffic.
Hello again, this is Paul Hutton welcoming you to October's Inside Intertraffic, where we're discussing parking. So today we discuss some options on how to make the end of vehicle journeys more efficient by making the parking process more efficient.
If you imagine in any other transport mode, you turn up somewhere and you've pre-booked, you've got a seat on an aeroplane or you've got a seat on a train. Whereas parking, you end up with people driving around looking for spaces, causing congestion, emissions and so on.
We talk about why getting parking right is so important when we think of everything from the environment to stress levels.
To deal with the congestion issue, to keep cars flowing, to keep traffic flowing, to keep our cities with the best chance of recovery.
We talk about payment, equipment, driverless vehicles and crowdsourcing.
Once you open the platform, you just say, I am about to leave, and then your spot will be immediately notified, to all the surrounding drivers.
And bring you what might be a new phrase, Immobility as a service. 3 great experts sharing great knowledge in less than half an hour. Let's get inside Intertraffic.
This is Inside Intertraffic.
So let's set the scene with parking and talk to our first guest, who is Andy Graham, who's a very well-known consultant in the UK and in fact across the world. And pretty much if you look at just any major transport technology innovation in the last 20 odd years across certainly the UK and beyond, Andy's usually had some interaction with it at some point. So Andy, thank you very much. You're a busy man for taking the time to talk to us on Inside Intertraffic. Before we actually get on to some of the solutions, just to explain to me why parking and people driving around looking for parking spaces is such a big issue for cities.
Oh, thanks very much, Paul. Well, it's fundamentally inefficient. If you imagine in any other transport mode, you turn up somewhere and you've pre-booked, you've got a seat on an aeroplane or you've got a seat on a train. Whereas parking, you end up with people driving around looking for spaces, causing congestion, emissions and so on. And there's all sorts of myths about exactly how much congestion is caused by looking for parking spaces, but the few studies that you see will generally agree that it's a bad thing. But also, if you think about it, it's a very stressful thing to do as well, particularly as there's getting towards the last few spaces. It's a cause of angst and anger. So it's a good thing all round if we can fix it.
You're a connected vehicles expert, so I presume there must be a connected vehicles solution that can just help us make things much more efficient.
Oh, absolutely. So a couple of places, for example, Harrogate and Portsmouth and places like that in the UK, they've used sensors in the road to work out where spaces are and an app that's tied into satellite navigation that will navigate you to a space. More importantly, rather than just finding your space when you get there, it will charge you for it so that you don't have to do anything. It's kind of touchless parking. So you get the idea of find me a space and pay for it all integrated, but also with the idea in the future that you'll be able to identify spaces not from having to have physical sensors in the road, but from the vehicles themselves. And a company called INRIX is already starting to do that using sensors in vehicles.
I remember a while ago when I edited a magazine and you were one of my columnists, that you came up with a really interesting concept of immobility as a service. And from memory, the idea was that rather than trying to manage traffic by keeping it moving, you worried about what happened to it when it stopped moving. And therefore, if you could manage where people parked and when people parked by maybe creative, flexible pricing, you could actually make a city run much more efficiently as a whole.
Yeah, I certainly think there's something to be said, following again from the airline industry or from the rail industry, in pricing peaks, but also pricing parking. So you do get that to some extent, but because it's generally based up until very recently on a piece of paper that you print out as a right to parking, with connected vehicles, you can charge non-linear pricing. So it's not so much per hour, but so much for the first hour, so much for the second hour, so much for the third hour. You don't have to charge by the hour, you can charge by the minute, like they do in many places such as Harrogate, as I said. And I think the whole idea of using parking as a much stronger policy tool. So we've had places try emissions-based parking, and we've had places try workplace parking. But I do think there's something again about the idea of it being much more dynamic than it has been. But that's enabled by the fact that you can start charging, as I say, people not just for the hour, but for the minutes they park. So it's not as unfair to charge someone £20 an hour as it is to charge 30p a minute. And so the whole concept there of additional pricing and so on, I think it's a really strong tool that you could use. And hence the phrase immobility as a service rather than mobility as a service. Focus on the pain point and focus on making that easier. And you can do it for all vehicles. You don't have to have a specially equipped mass pod. You could do it for any old vehicle.
And I think it's a very interesting point that actually, if you've got a journey, it will start and end in a city with parking, and any other journeys where people are going through the middle of a city, really, you ought to be encouraging them to go around the outside. So it could have very quick and very positive effects on entire traffic management for somebody who's worried about how they keep their city moving and keep their air clean at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And you can put the prices up when you have an air quality event. You can put the prices up when you have a particular need to divert traffic onto public transport, for example. And the whole idea being that as long as people know what the price will be before they start their journey, there's some element of tying in with satellite navigation, that kind of thing. And like I say, it's no real difference from techniques that are used by Ryanair and EasyJet and the aeroplane companies, and also increasingly on rail in terms of smoothing out those peaks.
Andy, thanks for your time. You've set up our discussion on parking beautifully. So thanks for joining us on Inside Intertraffic.
It's my pleasure. I hope it all goes very well.
For mobility professionals, this is Inside Intertraffic.
Just a reminder, this isn't the only way you can engage with parking matters via Intertraffic. We have a webinar on the 27th of October that I'll be hosting at 2 o'clock Central European Time, where we talk parking as an integral part of the seamless travelling experience, with speakers lined up from the Centre of Research and Expertise on Risks, Environment, Mobility and Development, the Flowbird Group and Park Now. Put it in your diary and join me on Tuesday the 27th. Now, our next guest is from one of Intertraffic's most famous exhibitors, the Austrian company SWARCO. Now, as well as all the work that you know they do in equipment, traffic lights, road marking and software, SWARCO are very influential in parking. So I caught up with Tom Buck, Solution Manager for Parking and E-Mobility, and we started by talking about how the car will play a part in the future of mobility for a good while yet, so we need to get parking right.
We need to keep parking as part of our world. It's about social inclusion. And I think what's going to happen as we look forward is a lot more open sharing of information. The UK government has a white paper out at the moment looking at this, and they're going to mandate the sharing of data in the transport network. So this means that if I set off from home and I want to do something like pick my kids up from school, I want to get to work on time, I want to get into the retail outlet, do what I need to do and leave, the information that allows us to do that efficiently will hopefully become more open. And now things begin to become more interesting, because when it's open, anybody can get it. So there are now projects in place where the car can request parking data. So I drive to the city using my sat-nav. The car says, oh, I know I'm on this route. I can actually say, hey, in my destination, there are 3 car parks. Give me the latest live information from those car parks, and it can be fed to them. And this comes out of projects that are happening in Holland, in the Benelux countries, but also sharing between, if I'm driving from Germany to Holland, for example. That means, I suppose, that the biggest steps in innovation are going to come from those companies that can take advantage of it. Not all of them are the big companies. If I can get hold of that data and share it efficiently, then I've got the chance to move cars more effectively from home through our transport network to their destination. To deal with the congestion issue, to keep cars flowing, to keep traffic flowing, to keep our cities with the best chance of recovery, both day and night economies, by the way. This is another twist to the story which came out in sort of 2013. There's these 2 sets of economies that we have. Then the combination of these services is the best way forward.
What about payment, Tom?
Making payment easier is excellent. We are in an industry which is socially inclusive, and I think that's quite critical. We forget this. Many discussions are usually by white middle-class males of a certain age who have bank accounts and have contactless cards. We have so many people in Europe still unbanked. Cash is still out there, whatever people may say. What do we do with the people who don't have bank accounts?
So what is SWARCO doing?
And this is where SWARCO we've been trying to do a lot of work. So we do have, app services which have been launched in Germany to combine on-street and off-street parking services, find and navigate. We have integrated Immobility. So, why do I have on my phone an app for Immobility and an app for parking, when fundamentally I parked my car in a stationary place, probably in a car park, because car parks give us the biggest opportunity to revolutionize our transport network and get it electrified. They're the most ideal place. They match all of the charging cycles you need. If you're visiting a site for 2 hours, 1 hour, or 7 hours, if I'm an employee, we can do it on AC charging. Why do I have a separate account to do all of this with? Or indeed, do I need an account? Why can't I just pull a parking ticket, park, plug in, charge, and if I want to pay by cash, let me pay by cash? Innovation in terms of payment should be ubiquitous. It doesn't matter what I've got, we should be able to offer it. And social inclusion, I think, would suggest that we're probably quite a long way from removing cash totally from this environment.
When we look at your stand is all about barriers and the equipment. That's what I think of in my mind's eye when I think of a SWARCO stand at Intertraffic. But it's very interesting that what you've been talking about there hasn't actually touched on any of the equipment around parking at all. Are we going to get to a point in the future where, because of some sort of connectivity, the need to have a barrier that goes up and down to let people in and out of car parks is going to become a thing of the past?
If you have a very particular view, you could see a roadmap where you might say, do we need to bother with barriers? I think the challenge, though, is that, again, we live in a world where people have very different expectations about their worlds. So it might make total sense not to have a barrier if my service delivery is to be free flow. But let's go back to that social inclusion package. These things work for high-end vehicles and people who have savvy tech, and let's address those, give them an option. However, we also face instances where, for example, in hospital parking, where parking space is at a premium, how do I really stop people from getting into that car park? These car parks are split up, so you have emergency staff of a section which they can use on a Saturday on their shifts. If we have no barriers, then the public has a tendency to ignore signs, drive in, and park wherever they can find a space. I think they'll probably still be around in special circumstances. I think it's quite hard to get rid of them. And also, interestingly, it's also a point where you engage with the customer. So a driver coming off the main road into a car park, there's a sort of transition zone, a bit like when you walk into a restaurant through the front door, they like to meet and greet you. So a barrier does allow that client in a more subtle way to slow down, change the headset from getting somewhere really quickly to, I'm now in a calm environment. The client can communicate with that person, whether it's printing on tickets, whether it's on displays or the area around it, and you welcome them, and then they can drive through. So traditionally, we've looked at barriers being a place where you get a ticket and you're stopped from going in or going out. They still have that function, but I think it's far more subtle and can be more subtle.
Okay, one final question for you, Tom, which I have to ask purely because, again, it's been something that SWARCO has been showing off, but I don't want to go into huge detail on. You have the solution that you've shown off in the past of the self-driving car park where a vehicle turns up at the barrier, and then from then on you get out and it goes and parks itself. How's that experiment and research going?
This is quite a fascinating one, certainly for me, because it was my project and it was started over the traditional sort of glass of wine in a bar, and one of the big OEMs suggested that we extend work we'd been doing on traffic light forecasting into this new area of autonomous vehicles in car parks. The objective was not park assist, press a button, watch your car reverse into a space, or have the car looking for a space as you drive past. For them, it was really, yes, the customer can drive in, drop their car at a drop-off zone and go off and do what they want. And then the car is moved from that zone to a free space in the car park. Again, here, mixed car park. So the objective was not to set aside a special area where we had lots of technology working in that area, and it was only for autonomous vehicles. This had to work in the general mix of public parking. So quite high standards and bars were set, and full level 4, which is no driver present whatsoever. This was what the outset of the scheme was set up to do. The OEM basically said, we will do everything about the car. And what we'd like SWARCO to do is to look at the infrastructure and how we can do this in a safe way. So here we had a combination of single space with detectors that scanned the zone. Infrared was used to detect incidents that were going on within the physical space. And our job was to do all the logic that said, okay, there is a space on, let's call it the roof deck. The operator wants to use the roof deck first. So we'll fill that with all the autonomous cars. We will give them a route from where they are to the roof deck by the most efficient method, up the ramps, round the car park, and so on. And if any event occurs, we will give the stop command to the car. And then when it's clear, we'll tell the car to proceed. So this built up into a car park at the OEM's factory. It was installed late 2017. And then in 2018, we began the first kind of semi-public trial. So you can book to join a test. And in the test, 2 vehicles were brought in. They are parked. You can sit in the vehicle. You still have to have a driver in at this moment in time for testing purposes. But if you take the drivers and passengers out, the vehicles can move on their own. So the car then requests permission to move, and we send the command to the car. It negotiates the car park on its own. So there's no real mapping of the car park. It negotiates, it knows where it's going, and it uses its own onboard detectors to work out where it is. It knows where the space is, and we parked that car. We brought another car, a different car in the OEM's production range up, and they were then both requested to return to the pickup area. And we stopped them at the junction and then gave one priority over the other, and it negotiated the ramp back downstairs to the drop-off area. And then the cycle was repeated with passengers on board. Their pledge is to have it in every single car in their product range. And this really opens up the key use cases. Fleet charging in car parks where you don't need to fill a bay with a charger. You basically have the car will come in. We can move it from its parking bay because it's got 10% charge, put it on a robotic DC charger, take the car away and park it, and then bring another car forward because we know, for example, if you're a season card holder that you're there all day, or if you booked for a 2-hour slot. So there's plenty of use cases around it. We've proven it works. We would like to start trying to do some real world deployments.
Fascinating stuff, Tom. We're out of time this time. We could have done an entire podcast and probably an entire podcast series just on what you've been saying. But for now, Tom Buck, Solution Manager for Parking and E-Mobility at SWARCO, thanks for joining us on Inside Intertraffic.
Thanks very much indeed, Paul.
So let's move on to one of the real innovations. And I'm going to speak to José Papí, who is founder and CEO of Etelätär Innovation. And Jose I've known for many, many years, and is one of definitely the cleverest people I've ever met in ITS. And he's got a very, very clever product from his company called UPark. So Jose, thank you for joining me on Inside Intertraffic. UPark kind of takes crowdsourcing to the curbside to help people find a space in that moment they need it most when they're getting home from work in the evening.
Exactly. Thank you so much for inviting me to your program. Indeed, I mean, the idea is that there's a lot of spare capacity that we are not using in on-street parking. That is basically when you reach your destination and then you find some time to find a parking spot, and this parking spot does exist. The only thing is that it doesn't happen to be in the street you are driving on at that precise moment. Actually, there are several research studies that have shown that in the Western world, circa 30% of all the traffic can be labeled as search traffic. That is the traffic that exists, once you have arrived to your destination, but you don't find a parking spot. No? So the idea of UPark is precisely to answer to this, and to answer to this in the, let's say, the most common, environment, which is on street. I mean, in the very street itself, without the need for a costly, sensors, costly systems, costly deployments.
Yeah, and I said about getting home from work, but it's any time when you're looking for on-street parking. But explain to me what UPark does and how people reduce the stress of finding a parking space.
Basically, the thing is we are trying to play with the incentive, that of a person waiting a few minutes of his or her time, to wait for another person to arrive, basically by signaling that they are leaving their parking spot. It's very simple. Once you open the platform, you just say, I am about to leave. And then your spot will be immediately notified, to all the surrounding drivers. So the surrounding drivers, in case they choose, your spot, they will notify to you. And of course, we are not showing your location to drivers that are a 20-minute drive from you, only to drivers that are around you. And then once there's a match made, you simply should wait for it, and then the other person will take your spot. And why is this crowdsourced? Because you have generated the parking spot, and of course, the person that takes your place, will reward you with a symbolic payment. So there's also an economic incentive angle to it.
Explain to me what a symbolic payment is. How much are we talking about?
What we have developed is a smart algorithm that basically combines 4 factors. The first factor is the degree of congestion that we have in the given city we are considering, First up. We find this in the TomTom congestion index. And second factor that we input into that is the cost of fuel. The third factor we input in, it's the general cost of living. And last but not least, and this is also very important, is what is the cost of the substitutive product? Basically that you go to a closed parking facility and then you pay, you have a pay per hour, and basically we combine this in a smart algorithm, and it depends obviously on the city. But for instance, for a city like Amsterdam, we would be talking a little bit above €1. For a city like Madrid, around €1. For a city like London, maybe we would be in £1.50 more or less. But what is important to say here is that the algorithm determines the price that is rational. It's always under what you would pay if you went to a closed facility. Obviously, you are not paying per time, you're just paying for finding the spot or taking it. And basically, that's how it works. And we adapted depending on the city.
It makes a lot of sense. And again, apart from the stress, just the cost of the fuel and the wear and tear of your car driving around trying to find a space, and your own time, that is the one thing you can't buy. It makes a lot of sense to have a system that allows you to just find a space easily. I guess the next challenge is getting enough people to sign up so that if I'm looking for a space near my home when I'm getting home in the evening, or if I'm looking for a space when I'm going out shopping, there's going to be somebody connected who's about to drive out of that space and is prepared to give me the space as they vacate it.
Correct. You have identified the critical challenge. It's that we need a critical mass of users for this to be successful. And that is why what we are currently, it's starting the deployment of the system in areas in which we know for certain that there's a critical mass of users. I'm referring to large business areas, manufacturing, industrial plants, commercial areas, university campuses. You can imagine these sort of large areas in which we know for certain that there's traffic. And only at a later stage, we would move to deploying the system in a big, let's say, town in which, as you mentioned, it's so important that you have a critical mass of users. The beta testing that we have conducted has happened fundamentally in Brussels, in Belgium, and in Madrid, in Spain. And we have had more than 250 users involved, and we know the system works. We have been solving a number of technical issues to achieve the adequate geolocation accuracy.
Excellent. And a lot of local authority staff listen to Inside Intertraffic. Are you looking to partner with city authorities if they were to encourage it, badge it themselves? That could obviously make a difference in take up. Is UPark a brand, or are you quite happy to be white label and just be the platform that other organizations and authorities could actually label as their own?
We are conducting currently discussions with more than 40 cities. Some of them are favorable to having it in just certain areas, of their town. Some other cities want it all around, where we would have the problem of a critical mass of users. And indeed, we would also accept a white labeling, probably just keeping the brand somewhere, like saying this is the on-street parking system for the city of Ghent in Belgium, powered by UPark in a small corner. No? So those solutions are fine with us. We are launching in certain areas with our own investment. We are co-funding the effort with other investors in other areas. But indeed, cities are also in our scope, and we are currently discussing with more than 40. The important thing is to demonstrate basically how easy. We would like to demonstrate how easy the system works. We have been studying carefully how to diminish the number of interactions needed to get a full matching, So now it's a very, very simple process in which you simply indicate your wish to leave your parking spot. Immediately, all the information about the size of your car, etc., is studied by the algorithm. So the other person, imagine you owns a car that is bigger than yours, then the other person will not even know that you are going to leave this parking spot. But if we can create the adequate match, then the other person will be informed. And if the match happens, the things take place really fast, right now. And yes, indeed, we are prepared to make a demonstration with smartphones, or why not directly with vehicles.
José, Papí, thank you very much for your time. It's great to talk to you again. Thank you for being on Inside Intertraffic, and thank you also to Andy and Tom for sharing their thoughts on the vital issue for cities of parking. And we've got more about parking from the Intertraffic brand coming up on Tuesday, 27th of October, with a webinar, Parking as an Integral Part of the Seamless Travelling Experience. As I've mentioned, don't forget to join me for that. Tuesday, 27th of October, between 2 and 3:30 Central European Time. Thank you, José. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you again for another Inside Intertraffic soon.
Inside Intertraffic is produced and presented by Paul Hutton and is the official podcast of Intertraffic.